Hey, how's it going? Mike from Mike Rolls Dice. Today we're going to be putting together and painting some Winter German weapon teams from Warlord games for bolt action to add to my German winter forces. This is the German weapons team, and you can see that it comes with a flamethrower team, a Panzerschreck team, a sniper team, some bases, and most importantly, 3 order dice. You can see the paint scheme that they chose. We're going to try and follow this somewhat closely just as a general kind of guideline for what the minis are going to look like. For my German forces, I have a box of the Fallschirmjägers, and I've 3D printed some tanks and stuff, so this should be a good addition to my forces. You can see here the minis, the bases, and the order dice. Now, the order dice come in sets of 12, so buying this box was a nice addition to be able to add some more order dice to my collection, so that way I could increase the amount of units that I use, so that was a nice plus. So taking a look at the minis here, these I believe are some sort of resin or cast minis, but they were pretty easy to work with. There is some mold lines and some areas that need to get cleaned up. Then again, these aren't Warhammer minis, so I'm not going to go too crazy worrying about too much of the detail and stuff, because they paint and clean up pretty easy. But just using my scalpel here and my X-Acto blade, I'm going to clean up some of the mold lines and some of the casting marks that were left. And you can see there's also quite a bit of this release powder, or this agent that they use. So we're going to have to wash these here in a little bit. So after washing these in the sink with some warm water and some soap, they cleaned up pretty good. I got most of that powder, that releasing agent off. Unfortunately, I used some warm water and they softened up, and I actually broke the Panzerschreck tube, so I had to re-glue that back up. And looking here, I was like, oh yeah, that beautiful shield. I can't wait, that's gonna look great. Well, that ended up going down in the drain. Don't ask me how, but it ended up going down in the drain. So I ended up making a piece out of some sort of hard plastic that you would get in any sort of packaging nowadays, and added some bullet marks and scuffing to it, as well as that viewing port. So now to base these real quick, I usually paint my minis either fully assembled and based. I'm not a sub-assembly sort of dude, and these aren't sub-assembly, but we're just going to go ahead and glue these to the bases with some super glue, and then we're going to take some of this sand here and apply this as well. And this is just some cheap super glue off Amazon. I find for this sort of craft projects and stuff, I try not to use the expensive stuff because it all works pretty much the same. So I'm just trying to get the right positioning to where there's some room for tufts and sand and little bits of rocks and stuff like that. And for the sniper team, they include these oval shaped or these lawner shaped bases. So with bolt action, they generally have a variety of base sizes. So now what I do is I just take super glue and I apply a pretty liberal amount to all of them, and then use a bodkin. This is something I use for fly tying, which you can check out my main channel, or you can use like a toothpick or something. And then I just kind of sprinkle the sand on the areas where the super glue has been applied. Now I will say, filming this, I was like, oh, I'll pull them out and pour the sand in. Since this, I've just pretty much, and I don't know why it took me this long to do this. If they're not 3D printed models that maybe have some stickiness to them because they haven't been fully cured, just take the base and stick it in the sand and shake it around, and that works pretty well. But you can see we've applied some sand here, and this is just sort of like play sand that you can get, some sort of sterilized sand. And now here, this is after priming with some black spray paint from the hardware store, and then going down into the basement where I have my airbrush and applying a pretty heavy zenithal highlight, because we are going to be using some speed paints for certain areas. I wanted to go with Army Painter. I usually use Army Painter, but Vallejo has this really decently priced, it was like 17 bucks, paint sets. And this is the German infantry paint set. I also bought an American paint set for my American forces. Using some of the German field gray, I'm just going to start working on the uniform here. I'm going to be using speed paints for the flesh in certain areas, but I like to just we'll start with the base coat for most of the areas, which is generally the outfit, which is going to be the jacket, and the pants are all going to be the same color, that German field gray. So one thing I will say is this paint is applying somewhat thin. I generally thin my paints down, but you can see here I'm going to have to go back and do a second coat. But while I was waiting for this to dry, I decided I'd move along to the next steps. But you can see here in the back some areas where I applied a second coat. So with this sort of paint, if you thin it down, you will need to apply a second coat. So now taking some of the green gray here, it's a lighter kind of almost tan or beige color. I'm going to apply this to where the, I guess you could call headscarf or the face covering is underneath the helmet. And then I'm going to go ahead and just take some Army Painter matte black here and somewhat thin down so it's not super dark. And I'm going to apply this to the boots and some of the areas where the black paint usually goes on these models, like on the top of their canteens. You can see here, and on some of the metal clasps and whatnot. So this is the speed paint here, is Army Painter speed paints. My buddy graciously gifted me a set, and this is the dark wood, and this is what I generally use for like rifle stocks and certain stuff like that. I'm also going to use this for the leather area of the canteen, if you will. And after we paint the canteen, then I'm just going to go here, and you can see it's still a little wet, but I'm working with it, going back with that green gray and hitting this field pouch. For the gloves, they seem to be some sort of gray color with some blue. I'm going to use some of this Army Painter gray here, this darker gray color. And just use this for the gloves, and then maybe hit it with some highlights later with some lighter colors. Now, I've been doing a lot of my skin tones with the Crusader skin from Army Painter Speed Paints. And you can see here, generally I like to wipe away a lot of it, but I'm going to actually leave some in the recesses there, and you'll see it's going to look nice with a second coat later. So now using the medium brown from the Vallejo set, I'm going to get all the straps, all of the areas that I think are going to be like leather belts, stuff like that, and just hit those areas with the medium brown, and probably 2 coats as well. Most of this paint's applies pretty good on lighter areas, but some of the paints I found I definitely had to go with at least 2 coats to get a nice finish. You can see here a second coat of the Crusader skin. We got a nice skin tone. And now what I decided to do, after hitting the whole base coat with that German field gray again all over the jacket and pants, I decided to do some edge highlighting, which I don't really do a lot, so it was nice to try my hand at it some more. And I'm using the green gray, and I'm just edge highlighting all of the raised areas, being pretty liberal with it and not trying to worry too much, just using my actual light to find the raised areas. Painting the helmet's gray because we're going to be actually applying some sponging techniques here in the near future. So now you can see some of the models that are here. I painted most of them up. I wanted to show you real quick how we were doing the white jackets. Again, this was a pretty heavy zenithal highlight that I did with the airbrush. And now I'm just taking some Army Painter Company Gray, I believe it is. It's a very light colored gray, almost white if you will. And I'm just gonna pretty liberally hit all the raised areas on this zenithal highlighted winter jacket. And I'm also going to hit the areas where the face scarf or the face covering is as well for the sniper. You can see on the helmets that I believe with German helmets during the winter time they would paint them white. So I'm going to go ahead and take a sponge here. This is packaging from the actual box that we got. I'm going to rip this apart, and then I'm just going to get a light layer on, kind of get some of the excess off, and we're just going to sponge on this company gray that we use for the white jackets. And just trying to give the appearance of a hand-painted winter helmet. Some of the helmets were a little bit harder with those recesses or the shape of the helmet, so I found bending the shape of the foam helped. So for the flamethrower helmet, I wanted to go with the almost like German camo Fallschirmjäger appearance. So we're going to go ahead and use Luftwaffe green that was in the box and the medium brown. And I'm just going to try my best at making a camo pattern. Just kind of randomly applying some splotches of color, if you will. And then I found afterwards I'll just go back and touch up some of the areas with the green to give the appearance of some layering. So now my favorite part, painting the eyes here, taking my one decent tiny brush and just ever so slightly hitting the areas. The eyeballs actually, I think the eyeballs are very well detailed on these models. So it was pretty easy to just barely touch the brush there and have the paint flow very nicely into the eyes. We got to throw some pupils in here, and I say, hey, that's not too bad. It's not, at least he's not too derpy looking, so I'm happy with that. So these are just some random tufts I got off Amazon and what's left of, I used on my Blood Angels army. So we'll go ahead, just take some super glue and apply this to the basing underneath those tufts just to ensure that they're not going to go anywhere. You can find the areas where there's no sand, for instance, because I didn't cover every single square. I didn't cover every inch of the base in sand. I like having some little patches. So you can always put the grass in the patches. You can put it right on the sand. It's really personal preference. So now I actually got this AK Terrain Snow diorama effects, and specifically for these winter armies. And I've never really used any sort of terrain effects. I've always just used craft paint and glued on sand and bits, done the basing without any special effects stuff. But this stuff's pretty easy to work with. Most of my army is modeled to where it's pretty snow covered. He did more like patches of snow, which I think is really nice, but no matter what, I'm still pretty happy with how this stuff turns out, the snow effect results. So all we're going to do is just take the snow effects and kind of hit the raised areas, and it depends. If you want to go heavy with it, you can. If you want to go lighter with it, it depends how snowy you want the bases to be. But it will dry out somewhat. It'll still keep its shape, but you're not going to be able to build up really big snow piles with this sort of stuff. And then what you could do is you could hit areas like the helmet, the shoulders. You can always hit areas like the knees and the jackets, or the elbows, places where you think the models would be kneeling in the snow and the snow would have accumulated. Well, there we go. There's our German winter team all painted up. So I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. I gotta say, I'm impressed with the quality of Warlord stuff. Now, these are some of their older models, I think. The newer plastic stuff is super high quality, but it's just coming from Warhammer and other games where there's so much detail and you have to clean so much mold lines and stuff like that. I really hate doing the mold lines and stuff. So these were pretty easy to put together, and I gotta say the Warlord stuff paints up really nice. It's not too complicated to get a pretty consistent and clean looking paint job on your army. So I'll be looking forward to add these to my German army list and possibly use them in some Conflict 47 as well. So I'll shut up for now and let's just take a look at how these turned out. Well, alright, hopefully you enjoyed. My name is Mike from Mike Rolls Dice. Again, me and my friends were just kind of getting into bolt action, and we're getting into Conflict 47. I'm waiting for the starter set to come, so look forward. We have some more miniature videos coming out here on the channel, as well as tons of battle reports. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one. Keep rolling high on those dice.